Hey everybody, Quantum back here again, and in today's video we are going to be breaking down what I think is the best Amber Steel song list that you could be playing for your store set championships. Prior to me posting this video, you likely, or hopefully if you didn't, it's linked in the description, saw the gameplay video where I used the Lantern version of this deck, and I kind of described why that version may not be the best because it lacks some versatility, but this version I think has your best chance of basically winning any matchup. Amber Steel Song continues to be a top tier deck in the format for sure. It is very, very strong, and if you know how to play it, I think you really can overcome any matchup. Before we get started in today's deck profile, though, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of the members of the channel, the Patreon supporters, and those who have donated through PayPal. I have been able to get like a couple of different items to support these like deck profiles and stuff to make them a little bit better, such as a ring light and whatnot. So if you do want to support the channel, beyond just liking and subscribing, there are links in the description where you can contribute. But again, you don't have to. Just your interaction in and of itself is really appreciated. It just helps me know that when you like and make comments that you want me to continue to post this kind of content. So let's go ahead and jump straight into the deck profile. To start off, we are playing 4 Robin Hood, and if you see this card, you already know why you're playing 4 copies of it, because you are playing the Big Shift Robin Hood. But this is an excellent turn 1 or turn 2 drop in order to set up for the turn 3 shift if you have it. And this is where Amber Steel Song, I think, really has a tremendous advantage, because all of your 1 drops, including these 4 queens that you see here, are all amazing shift targets to get out that 5-cost Singer, which basically enables all of your songs to be online. And this is part of the reason why this deck is so extremely strong, because songs, like removal songs that you have, basically represent free tempo removal, right? Like you sing the song, you don't spend your ink, so you can continue to spend your ink on developing your board. And this shift package of these 1 drops, being able to shift 2 Queen, shift 3 Robin Hood, is extremely strong. Whether or not you actually get this off on turn 3 or 2, it is important, because yes, that is a good advantage, but it's not always make or break. Like you can shift these later on and they're actually very relevant. Another great option for a 1 drop, especially when you're on the play, I think, is Cinderella, because if you have this card paired with, there's no beating around the bush here. You have to go a little bit higher on the curve to kind of describe how powerful this card is. But these are your key songs that you're going to be singing with Cinderella on turn 2, basically, because whatever your opponent plays on turn 1, assuming it's not a like Minnie Mouse or Olaf, let's a 1-3, the Cinderella singing this is going to out it. The nice thing too about this, if you watch my gameplay video, is this combination, you play 4 and 4, by the way, of course, outs things like the Cursed Merfolk right away, gives you a draw 1, which is, you go net positive, outs the Flynn Rider, it outs Cloud Kicker, it takes out so many things. It's very strong. And of course, singing Let the Storm Rage On turns 2, 3, 4, 5 with this is, it could represent so much value, because depending on how wide your board is, this card can take out things with like 8 strength potentially. But yeah, the 4 Cinderellas, absolutely mandatory and a fantastic card in this deck. One of the best cards in Amber Steel Song. And actually one of the main reasons to play this deck is because, again, this early package is so aggressive. It is absolutely incredible. It's probably, in my opinion, this is probably the best early game package in the entire game. Like better than Emerald, better than any combination of cards any other combination of ink colors can put up. In your 2-drop slot, we're also playing 4 Smee. Despite not playing Captain Hook, you don't need to. There's been many times where I have played this card, quested with it twice, it's got 2 damage, and I'm outing the opponent's board at the same time, and then I just drop a Rapunzel, heal it up, draw 2, and this continues to quest for 2 if the opponent can't out it right away. Like, there's so much value in this card. An amazing offensive threat on the 2-cost curve in order to just continue to pressure for quest to 2, or at a 3/3 body, out an important threat that your opponent might have. Your opponent basically has to answer this, and if they're answering this, they're not answering your shifted targets. Like, that's why the early game for Amber Steel Song can be so strong. And again, all inkable, all very accessible, very easy way to make sure that you develop into your curve. In the 3-drop character slot, of course, we are playing the 4 Aerials, but I've also opted for 3 Benjas. This card can definitely come in super clutch when your opponent might be on the cusp of a win with like a Lucky Dime or something. You have to know when the value is to play this card against like Steel Amethyst, Ruby Amethyst. If they're playing Spellbook, this card, usually you won't need to use it against that matchup, because those matchups, the Amethyst Steel could be a little tough, but Ruby Amethyst you should have a good matchup into. But this card does still represent tremendous value. On curve, like playing this on turn 3, to out a Fishbone Quill, to out a Popsicle, to just shut down the Hiram draw is very important as well. Like in set 2, I don't think it was that significant, but in set 3, it's actually really, really critical, because when you think about your toughest matchup being Sapphire Ruby, just slowing down their draw or stopping them on the draw 2 off of a Hiram drop can slow them down enough that you can continue to build up a board and get enough lore pressure on board that you can close out the game with one of the variation of this deck that we're choosing to play. So this card I think is really critical. I was wanting to play 4, but I just couldn't find the space. I think 3 is decent enough. Plus, like I mentioned many times, a 3-cost card that quests for 2, that's a 2/3 body that also outs an item. Like the card is absolutely ridiculous. Really good card. And of course, for Ariel, you're playing Amber Steel Song. I shouldn't need to explain this. If you don't know why this card is played, don't play this deck. In the 4-cost slot, the only 4-cost character we play, 4 Rapunzel. And the main reason for this is because we don't play Beast Tragic Hero. Rapunzel is an absolute force in this deck. Like I mentioned, the interaction early on with Smee, so you can get this out literally on curve on turn 4 to draw the 2 if you want. Being able to, well, the real reason that you play this is because Robin Hood is a 3/6 body. There's been so many times this card has had like 4 damage on it from like a Mim Fox, or 3 damage on it from whatever. And you just like, okay, Rapunzel, heal it up. Like that is such an insane, that interaction is so insanely powerful. Like, I don't know, if you guys have played this deck or played against it and that happened to you, you know how ridiculous that play is. Because not only do you heal a major threat on board that, you know, shift 3, shift, and then play on turn 4, like you're winning the game if that happens. Because if you're able to like take out a threat, gain the lore, heal the damage off this, draw cards, have double questers on board, like 2 lore questers, and then still be able to like continually take out threats, like it is literally one of the most powerful interactions in this deck, and why it's so strong. Yeah, this is just like, you don't need Beast Tragic Hero. It's too slow. Why do I want to wait to draw cards? I'll just play Rapunzel and draw instantly, because my stuff is getting damaged all the time because I'm out in your threats, whether it's by songs or by challenging. Now, I talked about this a little bit in my gameplay video, but the Queen is an integral part of this deck as well. You can see how nicely this deck just packs together. It's so synergistic. That's why I love Amber Steel Song. The reason this card is so important is, yes, it's a shift target for Queen, you know, potentially on turn 2 or later. But the real hidden gem about this card is the different ways that you can utilize this. And this really came to fruition, like my realization, when I was playing my Amethyst Amber Snow White deck. Because this card behind a Maximus was putting in so much work with the Pinocchio, like Pinocchio Exert on Amethyst, and then use this to boost and reduce, and then use like whatever to just constantly take out threats, bounce back to Pinocchio, recur it with the Snow White, and just consistently dominate the board whatever my opponent was putting up. And the reason why this is even more significant now and into the Inklands is because you have the ability to boost up some of your characters to make them take out locations. Like, imagine your opponent has like a Maui that's exerted on board because they took out, like, let's say your exerted Cinderella that sung a song or something, or your Robin Hood. Now you can like quest with the Queen, reduce the Maui, boost up the Smee. The Smee is now a 7/3. And it can either take out the Maui. If they have a Queen's Castle, you can take out that because it's 7/3. It's a 7 strength. It can take out an opposing Pride lands. It can throw a lot of damage into a McDuck Manor that you can likely finish off with anything else. Like, the Queen's interaction here is so important and so critical. It is a very strong card for multiple reasons in this deck, and that just being a couple of them. There's been also times against my worst matchup, Sapphire Steel, Sapphire Ruby, where, you know, they dropped Tamatoas, and I've been able to reduce Tamatoa, boost up like, you know, my Robin Hood or my Cinderella or something, and just take out the Tamatoa without losing my character in the process, right? So the Queen can be used very tactfully in order to overcome some of your worst interactions in this deck, or what you would think to be some of your worst interactions. Very integral card. Man, I think I've commented on Robin Hood like enough times. If you watch my videos, you know why you need to play this card. Yeah, this deck is expensive. It plays 4 of the most expensive, or what was the most expensive legendary in set 1. It plays the most expensive legendary in set 2, or set 3, sorry. And it could technically play the most expensive legendary in set 2 as well. But we've opted, again, not to play Beast for that exact interaction I talked about with this card and the Rapunzels. Yeah, Robin Hood, you shift this on 3. You're putting a ton of pressure on your opponent. It's a singer. It deals with aggro. It's good in the control matchups as well, because you can continue to quest and out mini threats from your opponent until they build up their board. You can just get so far ahead with this card. It is really, really important. And then just because you have synergy with the shift on the 1-drop Cinderella, so again, more synergy with the deck. The big Cinderella is actually super relevant here, because it I don't want to say auto wins you the steel matchup, but it really helps. And a really overlooked factor of this card is the fact that when you sing songs, you can challenge ready characters. That has come in clutch so many times for me in with Amber Steel Song, where my opponent is just like, well, you have like one card in hand, and I have like three, and I'm just gonna dump my hand on board, all readied characters like Flynn Rider and Curse Merfolk and whatever, and I'm just gonna quest for game next turn because I'm at 18, and you can't deal with all my characters. And I'm like, okay, well, let the Storm Rage on one target, and then Cinderella challenge the other ready target, and then, continue questing for game myself. And it's just like, it's so relevant, right? Because certain decks just cannot deal with this. And certain matchups, like Ruby matchups, you probably ink this, to be honest, because, this gets, like, well, potentially Tremaine, Maleficent Dragon, if you're on, like, the Ruby Sapphire matchup against Ruby Amethyst, you could play this out and just put a lot of pressure on them because they're real, like, their only real out is, like, Tremaine, if this is the only card on your board, and be prepared. But yeah, super relevant card. It's very, very rare that your opponent's going to get over this thing with challenging. I mean, I guess in the mirror match, if they're on like the Queen, they could do that, because I did do that in the mirror match where I took out someone's Cinderella with my own Cinderella, boosting it up to like 9, reducing theirs to 1, and then just swinging over it. But yeah, it's a really tough card to out. Maui doesn't even out this directly, right? They need the fish hook or the crab with the Maui to take it out. Like, it's a super strong card that demands an answer because it quests for 3 if it does go unanswered. So Cinderella Stout-Hearted, I think a 2 of is a perfect number. Now we get into the spice. Well, not really spice. I mean, this is pretty standard still. 3 bare necessities. I was running 4 because I was trying to really improve my matchup against Ruby Sapphire, and this is one of the key cards you definitely want to see on turn 2 in order to rip the Fishbone Quill out of their hand before they can play it, hopefully. But and at worst this is just ink, but I just didn't want to find myself playing 61 cards, and this card seemed like one of the reasonable ones to drop down to 3, because in certain matchups you definitely don't need to play this. And the simple fact that you are not, I don't say so reliant on, but like it is a big part of your deck to Whole New World. It can feel bad sometimes to like bare necessities and then know that you're going to Whole New World them next turn anyways. The reason why this card is so important though is because in the moment, the way that, depending on how your board state is, depending on how your opponent's board state is, depending upon how you want to develop the rest of the game for the next few turns, you need to bare necessities at the right time in order to say, like, I need to play around a certain card. I need to play around to be prepared. I need to play around a lucky dime. Let me just bare necessities and see what they got and rip it out of their hands and see what I need to play around in order to keep developing my board or hold stuff back or whatever it is I need to do. So bare necessities, basically like Duress from MTG, from what I understand, more or less. I remember playing that card back in like 2006. Really relevant card in order to help you. We saw like Nothing to Hide be played in Sapphire Steel and Set 2, just for the simple fact of looking at your hand. Like, yes, you drew a card, but like bare necessities being able to rip out that threat from their hand, like, come on, man, the card is insane. Only 3 Strength of the Raging Fire and 4 Let the Storm Rage On. I've already explained why these cards are so important. These are basically your Cinderella Sing package. Of course, this can be sung with other things as well, though. But these cards are just insane. Given that, Emerald decks are a thing in the format, the Let the Storm Rage On is definitely super, super relevant. Really insane card. Draw to replace itself and just deal 2 damage, potentially taking out a major aggro threat that represents 2 lore on the opponent's side. Really, really strong stuff. I tested out different ratios of this, and I think the one that works best is 3 Zeus and 2 Grab Your Swords. I was really hyped on 3 Grab Your Swords, but in Amber Steel Song, because you have so much other ways of removal, including your characters challenging, I don't think you need the 4 Grab Your Swords. I think this card is actually kind of limited in its application, and so I did criticize, to be fair, like List cutting this card down to 2, but in actual practice, I do understand why. Yes, sometimes this card can come in clutch and win you games, but oftentimes, like, you won't need this, and actually drawing into multiples of this can be a huge detriment, so I've opted to cut it to just 2. And the Zeus is definitely more relevant. Hits locations, hits characters for big damage. Another tech option that you could consider if you want something inkable is the World's Greatest Criminal Minds, because again, if you're thinking about your worst matchups, the Maleficent Dragon, the Tamatoas in Ruby Sapphire, this card outs them. This card outs Maleficent too, but it is uninkable. Both things are songs, and both can be sung with Ariel. This one can also be sung with Cinderella, but like, I just think the Zeus is just way more has way more application, because sometimes you just want to nuke something like a mini surfer or something like that, right? And this card just instantly deals with that, whereas this card would not. So way more versatile card in Along Came Zeus, but the World's Greatest Criminal Mind is also a consideration. Not going to explain this because it's basically what the deck functions around. If this card gets banned, I think Steel Song is kind of like not dead, not completely dead, but it definitely falls off quite a bit. Wheel into advantage. That's what this deck does. That's how it wins. And that's why decks like Ruby Sapphire are so good against it, because wheeling them into more cards probably loses you the game. But I mean, sometimes you have to do it. You have to know when to strategically wheel in that matchup. And then the variation that I think is the best version to play in the Infinite Inklands meta, specifically for your Sapphire matchup, Sapphire Steel and Sapphire Ruby, is the flute variant. We play a total of 20 songs. And again, this is a case to be made why you might want to just play like that extra bare necessities, because that ink, I mean, it's ink at worst, but it's just an extra song that you can cast and actually get value off of if you have no characters, and then just activate flutes for free lore. But the flute variant from, so let me rationalize this. Like, why would you not want to play Pride Lands or Lantern? Well, Pride Lands requires a little bit of a setup, and it is definitely very strong when you do set it up, but because it's, you know, a combo, you have to see the right pieces at the right time, and you have to hope that everything survives. And I think that's why you saw that deck not do too well in the recent 10K. You did see one Amber Steel song with flutes top, and you saw one Amber Steel song with lanterns top. To be fair, Brandon DeCanio is an amazing player, and he was playing the Lantern version, I believe, but he did run up against Ruby Sapphire, and that 2-0'd him, which you can't blame the guy for it. Like, it's literally the worst matchup this deck can run into. But this is where I think Flute can actually win that match. The Amber Steel song player played, I believe, the Amethyst Steel player, and I'm not sure what the outcome of that match was, but that's another match that could be a little tricky for Amber Steel song. But the reason you play Flute is because if you're able to aggro out, like, your mindset switches from like being a little bit more of a mid-range control deck in other matchups to just trying to be aggro in the control matchups, where you're just trying to get as much lore as possible early on. And then when those Ruby Sapphire decks and stuff start dropping like the Tremaines and the Maleficents, the Madame Medusas, the Be Prepareds, you need to have another way to gain lore, because your characters are going to consistently just get wiped. And so that's where the Flute comes in. In Ruby Sapphire in particular, if they're like, usually those decks aren't playing too many Judy Hops, and if they are, they're, you know, I play 3 in mine, but like some of them are only playing 1 or 2, and even if they out this, like, you draw a card, but the odds that they see it when they need it is probably pretty slim to nil. Like, they may get one like that combos to out your Flute, but it's not necessarily gonna out all your Flutes, right? So like, this card does enough in the end game that if you have like 2 of them active, maybe, just maybe, you can outrace what the opponent is doing with your flutes just by singing songs and activating the flutes for free lore. Because, you know, that's what Amber Steel Song does. Having 2 or more of these in rotations against your bad matchups, which are the Sapphire matchups, literally can win you the game. And that's why I think this card is better than the Lantern, because, again, like I described in those matchup videos, the Lantern is really, really strong. Don't get me wrong. It's, like, really good. But it just, like, it just feels like it's adding more to something that you are already winning. So it's like a win more card. Not that it necessarily is, but like, I already beat aggro. I don't need to like overextend my board to just like continually beat aggro. Because if you're playing the Lantern version into a control matchup, what are you doing? You're overextending your board so that you can hold New World into more advantage, which just means when they Be Prepared or when they grab your swords on Sapphire Steel or whatever, they're just wiping out your board anyways, right? Because those decks play Tinkerbell and stuff. So I just think Sleepy's Flute is a little bit more versatile for that reason. We're getting up to 20 minutes in the deck profile video, so I just want to cover some of the tech options. I already covered why you may or may not want to play the World's Greatest Criminal Mind. I've covered why I've opted for Rapunzel's over the Beast, Tragic Hero. And you may have noticed an omission of something like Tinkerbell. I talked about this a little bit in my gameplay video, but I just find this card to be a little too slow now. And I did talk about this in my Amethyst Steel video as well, where this card really had a lot of value when you could shift Tink and then just get the value right away. Like Sing, grab your sword, so you deal 3 damage to everything, 1 off Tinked, and then 2 off grab your swords. That usually represents a board wipe, especially on turn 4 if you get the shift. But because you're not playing that small Tinkerbell anymore, this card coming down on turn 6, or, you know, a little bit earlier, depending on if you're playing Lanterns, just doesn't have the greatest impact, because it hits the board, it deals 1 damage to everything, then it just sits there, and you have to wait a whole turn to use it, to sing with it, and it's just less impact. Don't get me wrong, it's still very strong, it's a great card, but where am I really wanting to play this? In the aggro matchup, and again, I have tools to dominate aggro as it is. So I just think that this card doesn't fulfill the purpose that it needs to now in Amber Steel Song. It's still a very good card. You can still run it to great success as with any of these options. But for me, that's why I've opted not to include Tinkerbell and opted to include other value options for that reason. Because again, if you've noticed, like, and the same thing with the Pride Lands, like, I don't necessarily need to see Rapunzel with the Robin Hood in order for it to combo, for it to be good. Like, Rapunzel heals up basically anything. It heals up the Smee, it can heal up the Ariel, it could heal up the Cinderella, it can heal up a lot of different things to just get me cards, right? The Robin Hood in isolation is a very good card on its own. If it gets banished by challenge, I still draw a card. It's still outing threats along the way. It's still gaining me lore. So the deck functions in and of itself without combo. And then again, with songs, well, you have things that can sing songs. You don't necessarily need the Cinderella, although it's very good. You don't need the Ariel. You can sing songs with the Queen, with the Robin Hood, like with the Rapunzel. The Zeus can sing this, or this can sing Zeus. Like, there's so much different synergy with this deck that, you know, multiple pieces combos with multiple other pieces, and that's why the deck works really, really well. Surfer Stitch is the last deck option I might want to consider. I tested this out at 2, and it is definitely good. It gives you the necessary card draw that you need when you don't want to be casting a whole new world sometimes. But again, I just think Cinderella is a higher impact. Don't get me wrong, this card though is a beast. Like a quest for 2, it's a 4/8 body. In some matchups, this card like literally wins you the game. But I think Cinderella is probably just as strong. Actually, I shouldn't say that. This card is technically better than Cinderella because it draws you cards potentially. But I don't know, Cinderella just seems stronger in certain matchups. Like this card, like if you're fearing more control decks, this card is better than the Cinderella. If you are fearing more aggro decks, I think the Cinderella is better. Because again, it can challenge those ready threats as well. So again, it's like kind of a toss-up. If you don't like the Cinderella, you can definitely opt to play the Surfer Stitch. I think this is still a very good card. The draw 2 is actually very relevant. And then being a 4/8 body, that quest for 2 is still very, very strong. And then again, I've already talked about why I don't play a third copy of Grav and why I might reduce Bare Necessities to 3. But these are other options you can consider playing around with your ratios. All in all, that is going to wrap it up for the deck profile though, guys. Let me know if you made it this far in the video, what you think. Do you agree with my takes? Do you disagree? Yeah, I want to hear from you in the comment section below. Let me know what else you want to hear me cover. I think this might be the final deck profile I do before the Store Championships because, you know, things are very, very busy for me. And unfortunately, I'm not going to any Store Championships because I'm just too busy. But if I was going, Amber Steel Song might be the deck I would take.